Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's a very special episode. I am Timo. I am joined on the phone here on the webcam with Abram. He's off in faraway Maine, but as you can see, I'm sitting right across from two of my favorite men, Tucker and Tanner. They've joined me in my lovely apartment with some of our favorite movies up here. Well, my favorite movies up on the wall for all your video viewers. And today we are talking about a movie they said was unadaptable. Stanley Kubrick said Lord of the Rings was an unadaptable book and could not be made into a movie, and he would not try. But
he was the man who made 2001: A Space Odyssey. I would like to remind everyone.
If you don't know who Kubrick is, well, I'm sorry.
What the hell are you doing on this channel?
They said that BLB couldn't be in person either, and look where we are. Look where
Screw
we are,
you,
everyone.
Kubrick.
We are hanging out together.
Stanley.
But long story short, we're talking about Return of the King, the third movie in the Lord of the Rings franchise. I mean, it's a long movie. It's an even longer franchise. I personally really love the movie. I really love Lord of the Rings. I'm wearing my one ring today, as I actually do most days. But, you know, we're here to talk about it. We're here to discuss. We're here to digest. There's a lot to digest in this film, I think. But first, a little housekeeping, and I'm going to pass that off to Tucker here.
Okay, so this is my first time doing the housekeeping, so I have to catch up a little bit in the
Put
moment.
on his little maid outfit.
Yeah, I put on my little beret, or what do you call it? Little thing.
I don't
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, whatever.
Continue with the show, Tucker.
So last week we watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, directed by Milos Forman, released in 1975. And for our review of that, we ended up putting it up at 13th out of 30th places. So we liked that movie pretty damn good. We actually had mixed opinions, I would say, across the board, but it ended up higher than it did lower. But that takes us back. Is there other housekeeping things?
I don't really think so.
No, just that.
I think we got to give a little plot synopsis of Lord of the Rings. In case you don't know, it's maybe one of the more well-known movie franchises out there.
Yeah, I heard of it before this.
Among others. Basically,
like Tom Jones.
What happens in this movie is old Mr. Frodo Baggins has got to carry the ring to Mordor into the heart of Mount Doom, the greatest named volcano of all time, and cast it into the fire from whence it came.
It's true. It's pretty simple when you think about it.
That's
about it.
That's what happens.
And that's why these movies are so tight and concise and just breezy, really.
Yeah.
Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings is known for being a quick watch, a breeze.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I digress. Let's get right into it. Abram, since you have the misfortune of not being here with us, why don't you lead us off with your initial thoughts?
So we, of course, had to watch the entire saga to understand Return of the King. I had never seen Lord of the Rings before, so I had to watch all three films over the past 2 weeks or so, right? I ended up watching them back to back to back because I have poor time management skills, but I think that's probably useful to track my thoughts on the saga as it evolved. And for me personally, I warmed up to Lord of the Rings with each subsequent entry. I have a lot of problems with the franchise as a whole, as a newcomer, that I want to discuss. But I have to say, I'm not sure that there are many more impressive blockbuster achievements than Return of the King. I think this film is stunning. I think it is truly, truly incredible.
There you go. Coming out strong right out of the gate there. Abram, you think it's pretty incredible as a blockbuster, which we'll get into in a little bit. Tanner, what are your thoughts?
I had seen Lord of the Rings before. I watched all three of them last summer, and I returned to them to watch them with my dear friend Tucker Hazel, who had not seen all of them before. All the movies lived up to exactly how I saw them about a year ago. I think Abram hit a lot of the same points that I'm going to be hitting. It is absolutely insane that these movies look and feel and are just experienced as good as they can be. All the performances are stellar. The production value is off the charts. It's really something. Lord of the Rings is really something to behold, and it's a lot different of a Best Picture winner than we've gotten into in the past because of that blockbuster nature. And I love Lord of the Rings. What can I say?
Yeah, what more is there to say?
What more is there to say?
Tucker, your feelings?
I would assume there's a little more to say, considering we probably have a little bit more of this review to go. But I, as Tanner alluded to, had not seen most of the series. I've watched Fellowship 3 times in my life, and I'd never seen Two Towers. I had never seen Return of the King. And in all honesty, I didn't know what happened in either of them. I'd never heard this plot synopsis. No one had ever talked about the story of them around me. I didn't know where it ended. So I was going into both of those pretty fresh faced. I knew the characters, and I have personally watched the trilogy of The Hobbit and read the book of The Hobbit, so I knew who Bilbo was, and I heard some of the references. I like, oh, the eagles, those are from The Hobbit. Gimli is the son of one of the, I think Gloin, one of the dwarves from The Hobbit. And I watched these going in knowing that fantasy is not my genre from a visual styling. I just think that it ends up looking more gray and samey than most other genres visually. But I think these are all very good movies. I have no experience with the series, and a lot of my opinions are going to be colored by that as a first time viewer. But mostly I'm going to defer to everyone else because this is the first time in Quest history that I have no preparation for this. I didn't take notes. I didn't prepare the wins and noms, none of that. So mostly, as Timo has been many a time, I am the sponge here. I'm the wall to be written on. And I
Yes.
really would love to be convinced as to why you guys love these movies so much because off my watching experience, they're good, but I don't know if it's anything super special.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to round out the initial impression saying that I think I've seen Return of the King extended and theatrical versions a combined amount of like 8 times. And I've seen the rest of them an equal amount of times. I usually watch them all together at once. I own the only physical movies I own are the Lord of the Rings movies extended. And what can I say? I love these movies so fucking much. I mean, you know, they are less cinema and less there's elements about them that make as blockbusters that really make you think a little bit, but there's so much to love in them, and each time I watch them a different moment comes out and grabs me. There was one time I watched Return of the King and I think I cried like 3 times in it. I didn't when we rewatched it last night. I didn't cry, but you
Mhm.
know.
You can bring up those moments throughout because I didn't feel almost any emotions going through this.
Wow, incredible.
Wow.
So
Abram, yeah.
Yeah, so something I want to bring up is I want to draw a parallel, and since I'm over here in Maine, Tucker can't hit me when I say this because I think Return of the King is kind of the Marvel Endgame payoff if Marvel movies had any kind of weight to them at all. What I think is so incredible, in my opinion, about Lord of the Rings, of course, being a little bit facetious, I'm a Marvel fan, is that for being overwrought CGI extravaganzas, they're still really emotional and impactful films. And that's what I really took away from them. There's a sense for, as high fantasy as they are, that this is an actually grounded narrative with characters and stakes, and I felt that. Even in the biggest CGI battle sequences, there's still a sense of place, and that really stole a lot of the experience for me. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to keep vamping as the mic gets moved around, but I'm going to. Because there's just a feeling here that I don't think many other blockbusters are able to capture.
That's very interesting that that you say that. I think that there is a lot of emotional moments, and there's an emotional core to this movie that I find very interesting beyond just this epic, long-winded story of end of the world type narrative that's going on here. And I mean, I don't really know how much we're going to get into Tolkien's writings here. We're talking about the movies. And it's important to understand that these are different from the books. Have y'all read the books? I'm curious.
Absolutely not. I don't read.
I read about 100 pages of Fellowship.
And Abram?
I am going to. I have them downstairs on my shelf now, but I have
Okay,
not
so
yet.
I've read them, and I've read a lot of the extended universe too, because this is kind of like my my MCU for So the movies are quite different, but when you read the books and you realize that it's even more of a feat than you really first imagined, because the books are infinitely more meandering and go off on tangents and just random, like, okay, we're gonna explore this character's name for a couple pages now,
Mhm.
which Philippa Boyens, Fran Walsh, and Peter Jackson wrote this film. It won for a Best Adapted Screenplay along with Best Picture and everything else it was nominated for at the Oscars. It was a clean sweep. Um, in there, taking this beloved story, people love Lord of the Rings, and they've loved it since it was published back in the '60s, and taking it into a movie, which is a very different format, and still retaining a lot of those elements that it was known for, and still having it come across both as a good movie and as a good adaptation. I think it's one of the best adaptations there is out there, even with the large amount of liberties it takes with the source material, they're justified in my mind.
Sure. Now, if I may, I think it's time we get into a bit of the specifics of the movie.
Go
And
ahead.
what better place is there to start with the characters? So let me pose a question to my fellow boys here.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite character? Because I feel like there is a correct answer to who the best character of Lord of the Rings is.
The best character of this film. Let's start with Tucker.
Well, you framed that question two ways. You framed it as best character or favorite character, and I would like a clarification.
Who do you feel is the best or your favorite? This is a loose question here.
Well, considering you framed it as there's a correct answer, I'm treading on thin ice here. But my personal favorite character in the series is good old Peregrine Took.
Oh.
Pippin.
That's a very interesting choice. Abram?
Let me just crash right through the ice here.
Okay.
The thin ice that we're walking along and say my favorite character is Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn. I think he's phenomenal. I would like to note we are keeping this discussion confined to Return of the King, but I do want to note that in Return of the King particularly, the Hobbit characters didn't make me physically annoyed. And I think that there's a great sense of character arcs and conclusion here. And I think that the question for me would have been more clear-cut had we been talking about Fellowship or Two Towers. But I think part of the success of Return of the King is the way it pays off all of its characters, and they all finally feel like they actually justify their screen time. So while I actually, for once, enjoyed the whole cast, I still think Aragorn, what he goes through is the most compelling. And I think Viggo Mortensen gives probably, in my opinion, one of the best performances outside of maybe the guy from Big Bang Theory who plays Samwise Gamgee. Who's going to make people upset that I said that.
Yeah.
Sean
yeah.
Astin.
Well, I think, and if I may, were you trying to infer that Samwise Gamgee is the best character? In the
No, I
series?
was absolutely saying that Aragorn is the best character.
okay, never mind.
He's the most badass. He's the coolest. He looks the best, and I think he has one of the best character arcs as well.
I would agree with you in broad strokes, but it's Sam. How can you ignore the bond that Sam and Frodo share and the trials and tribulations that they go through, and how Sam is really the hero of the story when it comes down to it. He's the one that pushes Frodo to go forward and continues on. And I mean, as those are just some of my most heartbreaking moments in cinema is when you go home, Sam. I mean, it's kind of it's a funny line, and seeing it.
I'll just leave. I'll just go back.
Okay,
over and
lol.
over, seeing it many, many times, but it still resonates with me. It's still a heartfelt moment. Sam, he's the one.
Yeah, okay. There is something to seeing like the sooty faced Sam and Frodo, who in the first movie, and we'll try to steer away from referencing the other movies as much as possible.
Except for
but
when you
we do need to. In the first movie, no, they're these golden faced youngish guys from the Shire. They're having a great time. They're curious. They're having fun. And then you fast forward to like halfway through the Return of the King. They're sullen face, and Frodo's been stabbed any number of times. And
They're starving.
They're starving. And that Go Home Sam sequence and that line delivery is all really great stuff from Elijah Wood and Sean Astin. And of course, like I said, there's no bad characters, especially among the main cast of Lord of the Rings. I think that Elijah Wood as Frodo has one of has a very solid arc as well. He's being manipulated by Gollum
And the ring.
and the ring, and he's seeing himself and his obsession with him fighting against the obsession with the ring reflected in Gollum, which is part of the reason why he wants to no, he can help us, but also for thematic reasoning, he's like, I have to believe that Gollum can be trusted to some extent as a hobbit himself.
Yeah.
One thing I do have to say is, going off of the Sam thing, is him being, like Timo said, the real hero of the story when you go down to it. As I think that Frodo is one of the weaker characters of the cast, especially in the films. Of course, the books probably explain a lot more of his internal reasoning. It's written from his point of view, but he gets pretty small amount of screen time in comparison to the large group in Two Towers and Return of the King, which is wars and his battles and his kingdoms fighting one another and all that. But Frodo gets a lot of just making faces at the camera and is kind of just dragged along by his foot. I feel like Sam is the one that has the personality that brings out their relationship, and Frodo, unfortunately, as I've alluded to many times in our Discord and conversations, he's just kind of a dried toenail. He's so uninteresting in comparison, especially to Bilbo Baggins, who I really like from The Hobbit. But I think that's one of the weakest aspects of the story is Frodo's just not a very compelling main character. The concept of him being corrupted is interesting, but I don't think that's shown enough in screen time wise throughout the trilogy for me to feel like, okay, this is really impacting him because I don't know a lot about him as a character, what his goals are. He's just thrown into this and that's about it. The things that Sam brings out of him are interesting and their relationship is interesting, but unfortunately, I don't think Frodo really holds a candle to really a lot of the rest of the cast.
I
That's-
agree with that in large part. The moments of that dynamic that stand out are Sam's moments.
Yes.
We want to talk about emotional resonance. It's the scene where Sam and Frodo are staring down Mount Doom and they can't move, and it's something like Sam says, "I can't carry the ring for you, but I can carry you there."
It's a great
and he
moment.
picks it.
Yeah.
I think the strength of Frodo is the dynamic he creates between Gollum and Sam. But I
Yes.
agree, and I don't know if it's a function of a lack of screen time or a function of him just not having anything surprisingly that useful to do. He is the one carrying the ring, but he is a car. He's a car. You got to put gas in the tank. You got to make sure it's still driving.
He's the MacGuffin, if you think about it, because
He
the
really
ring just
is-
becomes a part of him. Of course, that's
Right.
thematic, but he is the MacGuffin.
Mhm.
But ultimately, I'm not sure how much of an issue it is because I'm not even positive that Frodo is the one main character. I think the narrative is very decentralized. I think you can just as easily say that Aragorn and Sam are main characters. And I think that because Frodo serves such a great function in developing the relationships of these central characters, his weakness for me does not really take away from the success of the film.
Sure.
hmm Yeah, well, you talk about that, and this is truly an ensemble cast film. I mean, Orlando Bloom, Viggo Mortensen, Billy Boyd, Dominic Monaghan,
Mhm.
Yes.
all of the characters here. You said Pippin was your favorite. I mean, really, I think there's some incredible performances all around. Even in some of the side character moments, I forget who plays him, but Faramir is an excellent character who's
Mm.
really fun to watch. Well, not fun because he's getting shafted by his dad.
Yeah.
But it is a very interesting dynamic, and I find it's heartbreaking. Lord of the Rings is not a super uplifting story, really. A lot of the moments are fairly down, but it comes across well. I really like a lot of the side characters, and for me, they're fleshed out enough in the films. They're fleshed out much more in the books, of course, because you have 5-6 times as long
Yeah.
to talk about them. But there's moments, I guess, I think about in the Two Towers with when Theoden buries his son. That's a really emotional moment for this side character that we really get to learn about him, and then that develops further into him leading the group of the Rohirrim to charge and help out Gondor, and Eowyn, his niece, going to war as a woman in Rohan, which was not really the thing there. And you complain about Tolkien. Tolkien doesn't really write women or non-white characters in his film, in his book. But Peter Jackson pulled out as much as he could, I think, from that to have some of those characters shine. And I mean, talk about Eowyn, faces off against the Witch King and he says, "No man can kill me," and then she says, "I am no man," and takes the helmet off and stabs him. That is like a fist pump in the air kind of like
Absolutely.
awesome moment.
There is a solid number throughout the series, and especially in Return of the King. There is a solid number of triumphant fist pumping moments. There's the beacons of Gondor.
Yeah, that
of
is
course.
that is
Pippin.
one of my favorite
True.
sequences in the whole movie. I mean, Peter Jackson's going to film it in New Zealand. He filmed it the whole movies. All of it was produced in New Zealand all at once. This is that's pretty common knowledge, I think.
Yeah, the entire series was shot as one giant production.
Yeah, like a year straight of filming.
Yeah.
And they used that New Zealand natural beauty to really enhance the film. I don't think you could make these movies anywhere else.
You couldn't make these movies today. But the fist pumping moments. I mean, after the beacons of Gondor, I mean, directly following that, you have Theoden saying, "Then Rohan will answer."
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a great fist pumping moment. Of course, we got to go back to our main boy Aragorn when he gets the sword again.
He whips it out, and he's like, you could tell that he is accepted. His character arc becomes, comes into fruition there.
Yeah, I have when that moment happened, I have that's cinema baby when that moment happens.
When he takes his sword out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
When he gets the sword for the first time.
Okay. I barely even remember that, to be honest.
How dare you? quite honestly. How
I
dare
do
you?
think that what we're raising, especially what Timo is raising, speaks to, I think, the biggest issue with Lord of the Rings, which is honestly not necessarily an objective issue with the films, but it's, I think, their relative inaccessibility if you have no clue what's happening.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like Timo, you're naming off of a lot of plot moments that I remember in broad strokes and characters I remember in broad strokes, but on a first watch, you can't latch onto these characters and these locations and these lore elements particularly well because for as sprawling as the films are, even just their theatrical versions, they still have to move. There's still so much ground to cover that I think that I have a already, I would say almost awe-inspired appreciation for this film, but I feel like upon a second watch of the entire saga, I would have a more, like, intellectual sounds stupid, but a more, I think, holistic appreciation for what Lord of the Rings is and does, because I'd have more time to sit with these characters, which I'm not sure that the theatrical versions, if you're unfamiliar, give you that time on a first watch.
You
Yeah.
are correct. I
Yeah,
if you'd say
that's-
so.
You're yeah. Having seen the extended editions, which were not, I mean, they factor in, but I'm not going to think about them in terms of the ranking or whatever. You get more character moments, you get more characters interacting with each other, and I think the one for Return of the King adds something like 45 minutes of screen time. It adds a lot.
Good googly moogly.
And so there's a lot more to cover there with a little bit more time. I was reading on the Wikipedia page about the film, and for the extended cuts, Peter Jackson filmed a couple of pickups after he won the Best Picture.
Oh, a little post Best Picture sprinkling of content right
A
there.
little changing there. Yeah.
I think that is all something I need to consider when talking about these films. Is I was watching them from a first watch perspective, nothing about the books, nothing about the story. My entire groundwork was having seen Fellowship 3 times. I was very familiar with these characters at their outset, with the relationship of the Fellowship, the titular Fellowship, which unfortunately, from my perspective, enjoying Fellowship so much, at one point it was one of my 100 favorite movies of all time. I don't know if that dynamic between the entire Fellowship, of course, it's broken up, carries throughout to the end. I feel like when characters are seeing each other at the very end, I'm like, okay, yeah, well, they haven't seen each other in a long time, and they did other things, but I don't know if like the connection really carries through because they're building relationships with each other, and you don't really get a lot of interaction between, say, like Merry and Gimli. And I think the dynamic between the Fellowship was something I enjoyed so much in terms of the introduction to their characters that when everything is split up, which is, I guess, necessary for some story points, and then they get thrown into
Well-
so many Hold on. They get thrown into so many battles. It just takes the focus away from those characters, in my opinion. And I have the biggest issue with Two Towers with this, but I think it also applies a little bit to Return of the King, which is why I personally don't like it as much as either of them as Fellowship, is it focuses so much on the action and these overly complex battles, in my opinion, and the scale and the all of that epicness of it, that I think it loses some of those intimate character moments and introductions that I appreciated so much about the beginning of the story. So while I really respect Fellowship Return of the King, and I think that it raised my opinions on the series as a whole as it tied together the character arcs and gave them more interesting character moments, I think, than in Two Towers. I don't know if it keeps that passion that I enjoyed so much out of Fellowship. I think the series kind of loses that as it goes on.
Well, I think you're going to have to bring that up with the JRR himself because he wrote the splitting of the party
Well, of course,
to say,
yeah, no.
and it's not, Peter Jackson really couldn't do much about that with the source material. I'm not sure if I agree with it losing. It's kind of losing the connection there at the end. I think that some of the coronation scene with Aragon, holy crap, giving
Aragon?
Aragorn.
Aragorn, whatever.
Aragon is that dragon
He's
book.
from some other fantasy thing that I don't know about.
That could have easily been a character that was in all these movies that I totally forgotten. Which is, and I think Abram can attest to this. Sometimes it's really hard to keep track with all the shit that's going on in these movies. I'm tired. The entirety of the series, of course, except for Fellowship, because I had seen it so many times. Felt like I was grasping at straws, trying to keep up with all these characters and locations. And when you mention a character and a name that could totally be real, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I just have to refer to you because you know so much about it. But there could have easily been a character that was entirely lost, that had a character arc and everything, because there's just so much going on in these movies. And I don't know if that's a positive or a negative in terms of the grand scope of the films, But coming off of watching a film and being like, yeah, there's probably 25% that I just don't remember at all because there's so much going on. I have to feel like that's maybe not something that I enjoy so much.
So I want to jump in here and completely, Timo, I'm sorry, whatever you're going to say, I'm moving on from it because I wanted to respond directly to what Tucker just said and kind of his overarching point. Because I feel like there's really two things at play here. The first is I think that the splitting of the party is effective because for me it provides, in my opinion, a clearer narrative focus because you have a smaller group of characters interacting with plot points that are pertinent to them. One of my problems with Fellowship is that, okay, let's go open the door. Frodo can open the door. Everybody else can throw rocks into the pond. Let's go fight the big troll man. Okay, Aragorn can do that. We can have Legolas, who is awesome, by the way. We can have these guys fight, but what are the other people going to do? I feel like what's great about Two Towers and then Return of the King is the way that they split up the characters in ways that prioritize important character relationships and important progression of narrative. And to that point, I don't think that the problem with the Lord of the Rings films is that they are poorly structured or that they are too complicated or too confusing. I think the problem is that we have both watched them one time. What's interesting about doing Quest for the Bestest is this is Lord of the Rings how many years removed now? Like 18 years removed, right?
Yeah.
And in those 18 years, you have a lot of time to watch these films over and over again. I feel like the success of Lord of the Rings, in large part for me, even though I think some CGI elements don't hold up and certain things don't hold up, is that these films persist throughout time. And you're going to keep getting more information out of them upon rewatches and all these things. These are evergreen in a way that I don't know how many other films are. They're timeless. I really think that they are. And I think that that's to the strength of the film and to the detriment only of an early impression of what Lord of the Rings has to offer.
Yeah, I mean, you could really look at this as like, and Tucker and I talked about this after we watched Fellowship or Two Towers or something like that. But in a lot of ways, this is a fantasy blueprint, and fantasy, love or hate the genre and take what you will from it. It is a challenging genre to do because you have to establish worlds and transport the audience to a completely different place and characters that they might not have any on face value connections with. And when you take Lord of the Rings, I feel, Timo, you've read the books, but I feel like this is maybe one of the best adaptations of script to screen or book to screen things that you can have. And so both the books and the movies are like fantasy blueprints, and
Yeah,
that alone is incredibly respectable and impressive, and does factor into the timeless value of these films.
Lord of the Rings is a bit generic, but that's because it establishes the genre. Tolkien was the first to think that elves, weren't small forest sprites in, doing funny magic to trick people. They were these beings, and they have power, and they're important, and that is a big shift in the way that fantasy was written about. The idea to start Lord of the Rings was that Tolkien wanted to recreate a mythology for England, for Britain. There wasn't one like there was in the Nordic countries or in Germany, and he really felt that there was something missing, and so he combined all these elements from real life mythologies and mixed them with his own experience in World War I, and that spit out Lord of the Rings, which then got adapted into the movies, which, I mean, I said it before, I'll say it again, do a very good job of choosing when to follow the books, when to use the exact lines of the books, and to choose when to take a little bit of liberty, write some new dialogue, or write a different line so that it flows better as a film. Hate to break it to you, but the scene where Éowyn stabs the Witch King doesn't happen. He's not defeated by her at all in the books.
What?
Which is a shame, because it's just actually better.
It's a great scene.
It's
a fantastic
They
scene.
improved it
Yeah.
by doing that. So,
Sure.
in terms of adaptation alone, it deserves serious accolades.
Sure.
It's so easy to mess that stuff up.
Yeah, for sure. You guys want to talk about the production value a little bit? Because
Sure.
just the sheer, it might like slip your mind while you're looking at this, but if you really think about how impressive it is that they just designed all this, either practically or CGI.
And they did it like 1999.
Oh yeah, true. Because obviously, like I said, these were all made in one long production, and Peter Jackson was doing prep for this for 4-ish years.
Yeah. He started prepping long before they started shooting. Which in watching the extra videos that come with the extended editions, you learn a lot about how much thought goes into every single element of the film is meticulously thought out, including stuff that it doesn't really matter and you don't really care about. I mean, I don't really care that the shape of the axe is correct in the Mines of Moria, but they are, you know.
Yeah. One do want to shout out, and uh, at the same time, though, you kind of have to take a step back, and I'll refer to Timo on this. Is Gondor and all that stuff, is that mapped out in the book? I'm sure it's...
Oh, yeah.
J.R.R. Tolkien is meticulous in his
Oh,
description
it's very
of
mapped
things.
out, yes.
Okay. So, but yeah, like the design of it is impressive. It is that in the books as well, like the
Somewhat, yeah.
description of it.
Yeah. So, well, Peter Jackson hired 2 Tolkien illustrators that had been working drawing illustrations for republications of the books for years as like the main art leads of the whole series, and they had their fingers in designing everything. And Peter Jackson really liked what they were drawing, and so he took a lot of that as inspiration. And those guys were reading the text and pulling out what they thought it would look like, and they collaborated a lot and led up the art department in just figuring out how everything looks.
Because I don't think there's nothing in this movie that looks bad or even subpar, in my opinion.
I think there are CG shots of monsters that come out every once in a while that aren't as good. You have to remember, there's a fully CG character in these movies.
Yeah.
And most of the time, I don't really notice because I'm just drawn right in and I'm just thinking about, oh, Sneaky Gollum's taking away the Lembas bread again. Like, oh my God. Like,
Shucks.
Come on now, Gollum. What's going on?
yeah, and I don't think, oh, it's a CG, it's Andy Serkis walking around in a suit, you know. It's for the time period and, you know, for the technological abilities of the early 2000s, it's incredibly impressive. And for the most part, it holds up. I think those model shots always look incredible. You know, the when
cities, yeah.
when they pan up and you can see Minas Tirith over the hill, and that was they did that in camera with real effects, and they did some compositing for the extra mountains, but that was a gigantic model they built. It was like 2 stories tall.
Holy shit.
And so that's kind of where they're coming from in terms of production design and all those elements. Important to note, all 3 Lord of the Rings films won Best Visual Effects.
Yeah.
Year after year.
Well deserved.
Yeah.
I also want to talk for a second about visual clarity, which is really important to me, especially in these enormous battles. When we began Fellowship, I was not particularly a fan of how a lot of the action was shot, and I think it gets better as the saga goes along. And especially when you get towards the end and you have these incredibly enormous battles, there's a great degree of visual clarity to what's happening. There's, of course, a lot of chaos, but I don't think I was nearly as disoriented by the action by the end. I think that there's the incredible shot when Aragorn brings all of the soldiers to divert people out of Frodo's path, and there's this overhead shot of the armies of men surrounded by all of the orcs and everything, and there's such an attention to making it clear to the audience what is happening, which is something that I think easily gets lost in these enormous CGI disasters that I won't name by name here for the sake of the man in the red shirt on the couch here. But I think it's really something to point out and appreciate, in my opinion, how the battles have heft to them. And I think that begins with production design and then goes to the animation and the way that the actors sell these combat sequences, the actual physical acting of all of it. It's all very impressive.
Well, I entirely disagree. The battles are by far my least favorite parts of this series. I think it takes away a lot from the character moments that I do enjoy so much. And arrows and swords and people in gray and brown suits, it's just so boring to look at. And I can't tell what's going on half the time. And if a character shows up, I'm like, well, I guess they were probably there and a horse fell over or something. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And it's so visually unappealing. And it's entirely a facet of the genre and the fact that, yeah, they're using swords and bows because that's the weapons of the genre. But when you compare it to something like its superhero movie, I just think that the visual, like you said, the visual clarity, I have to disagree, is in terms of large scale bombastic lasers and things that I think just translates so much better to kinetic action. And when everyone's swinging their swords really slowly and there's just arrows going everywhere and all the orcs look the same and all the men are just in the same kind of costume, like, okay, well, I'm just going to turn my brain off and eventually something will come out of it. I really don't think that they're impressive from a production value point of view, but I just don't think they're very engaging.
Yeah, so Tucker, I just don't agree with what you're saying because I think it comes down to the way that these battle sequences are orchestrated. I think that there's a great sense of direction and of place. I think of the Siege of Helm's Deep, which is probably the most chaotic battle sequence, but there's still a lot of clarity in the sense of, okay, there's a lot of people moving around, but it's not necessarily any individual man versus any individual orc that matters. It's the way that here come all these people up this side bridge, and then let's yell fire to the archers, shot to the archers, archers back to the guys. The orcs are falling down, they're being shot. Here come the ladders. The ladders are being fought back and forth. There's a sense of the micro and the macro that come together to make these sequences understandable, which is, I think, more difficult than what you're talking about, Tucker, because you don't have those colors. You don't have, oh, here comes Superman with heat vision and things of that nature. You have men in chainmail who have swords and orcs, and they're all the same color, which makes it more impressive then that I think you can follow it because it operates on multiple different levels of the battle.
There's the big discussion between the Battle of the Pelennor Fields in Return of the King and the Battle of Helm's Deep in the Two Towers. And I think, like you were saying, in Return of the King, they have this epic, huge battle at the end. They have the siege, and you're watching as they fling heads and corpses onto the city, and they start throwing rocks, the orcs do. And then you get around to the point where the Rohirrim come, and that Rohirrim charge where the horse guys just, run, and you see, like you're saying, there's the micro elements of the orcs forming ranks and getting the stuff ready, and then Theoden is giving his speech, and he's yelling, and there's the mini conflict where Eowyn doesn't want to get discovered in that moment because she's a woman on the battlefield and shouldn't be there, according to the rules of the universe.
No, according to Timo's morals as well. I think you should make that clear.
Yikes.
And then as they all charge, and there's and then it develops. There the Oliphants, the gigantic multi-tusked elephants come running in, and there's those sequences which are just there's no other word for it. They're badass.
True.
They have the dudes riding the elephants that go and have the barbed wire between their tusks, and they just that's hilariously fun to watch.
And Legolas taking one down by himself. I mean, come on. How cool is that?
It's impressive.
It's just good fun, I think, in between these, character moments that are very serious and the story that's very serious. And that's why it works as a blockbuster. We've talked about it at the beginning. This film was not meant to win an Academy Award, not let alone 11.
Okay. Which I didn't know if they were aiming for awards with these or not. I don't know what their end goal was.
Their end goal was not to be
Really?
winning
Okay.
awards. Their end goal was to faithfully reproduce the books into a great movie. And what they did was do that. And
Yep.
then for Peter Jackson, it really was the cherry on top that he got to go up there and give so many acceptance speeches. Which, if I may, I would like to list off the
Sure.
the noms, the wins and noms, which for this movie are the same. It won Best Picture, of course. It won Best Director. It won Best Adapted Screenplay, Art Direction, Costumes, Makeup, Score, Original Song for Annie Lennox, and I think Billy Boyd as Pippin in Into the West. Sound mixing, editing, and visual effects.
Oh, that Into the West when Billy Boyd is singing that song while Denethor, right?
Yeah.
Has sent Faramir
steward of
and
Gondor.
various other soldiers over to retake that front line again,
On a
and they
suicide
just
mission.
get slaughtered. That is such a harrowing scene, and that's a great scene to exemplify the emotion tied up in those big battle scenes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and especially with that scene, I really like the editing of that kind of sequence, intercutting between, and I made this reference, longtime Quest viewers will understand, the two elements of Tom Jones, the disgusting eating and the horse riding. But no, of course, that's a joke. I think this obviously worked a lot better than anything in Tom Jones. But seeing the king just not giving a shit and eating sloppily a tomato or whatever.
Well,
and
not only while he sends his soldiers, but his son to
yeah.
die.
If I was to finish my sentence, I would have gone to a similar direction. But I do think that is one of the sequences that I think works best for me in terms of showing the impact through intercutting, which is something that I think the films as a whole, in terms of how much scale and multiple storylines they have to keep track of, I feel like sometimes you lose track. Okay, we haven't seen Bilbo and Sam for 45 minutes. And I'm like, okay, well, what are they up to? Did something important happen? And the intercutting, I think, is both a strength and the weakness in terms of that large scale versus the small scale. But inside of scenes, I think it works great. On the large scale, I don't know if personally I think the weight is distributed evenly, but that's a very personal thing. But again, I think that scene is fantastic and one of the best examples of the intercutting in the series.
So I think it's time. Abram, do you have one more thing to say?
One more thing to
There you
say.
go. Say it.
Mhm.
The soundtrack for these movies,
Oh,
It's good.
just get out of town. That's all
I mean,
I'm gonna say.
it's is it possibly the best movie soundtrack ever?
No, because it
No.
has to go to Star Wars. I can't allow that to
Oh,
happen.
okay.
But I'll
Well,
give it second best.
we do have a John Williams versus Howard Shore debate here, but I will give you that it is at least one
Back to the
or at
Future.
least two. It's either one of
Oh,
those,
yeah.
and I think that's not a debate for here.
It'll-
It's not here nor there, but I mean, those
It's
are
always
two
unfor-
heavyweights right
yeah,
next.
It's
to
always
each other.
unfortunate that we have to shove like score and stuff to the end. But yeah, it is truly great. I think it's easily up there with some of the best of all time.
It functions. There's look up Lord of the Rings score on YouTube, and you'll get a bajillion video essays on why it's so good
Mhm.
and how it works as a musical from a musical perspective and from a with the film perspective.
Yeah, for
Okay.
me, the score does work really well. It's honestly probably one of my favorite aspects of the
Mhm.
entire series is the way that they use, honestly, a relatively small number of themes in terms of motifs and repeat them in different ways.
Leitmotif.
Yeah, yes, yeah. That's what I was saying. And you reutilize them in terms of different emotions to deliver a different impact. And when the Shire theme inevitably is played near the end of every single film, you're like, okay, we're tying this back to the beginning. The
Mhm.
hobbits really are important, and this is their heritage and all that, and this is what they've been through. But look, it's all sullied by what they've gone through. And I think that's really cool and really important. And for my opinion, one of the reasons that the score works so well. And I think that's obviously why it's so revered. But I'm a big leitmotif guy, and when I hear the Shire theme played sadly, I'm like, okay, there's something
That's
here.
cinema, baby.
This is emotion.
When I hear that Gondor theme played with great triumphantness as the beacons are lit, I mean, come on. That's cinema, baby.
That's cinema, baby.
All right. Well, I've tabulated a couple votes here. I'm going to need a couple more. So we'll take a quick break and we will come back with our final verdict on where this film lands on our growing list of the best picture winners of all time. All right. And we're back. I've received the votes. Drum roll, please. It is numero 4.
Oh, good stuff. Good
4.
pick. Good number.
4 out of 31. That's pretty sweet. It's actually, it was an even 4. Our votes added up to 16 and it went exactly there.
Nice. That's always nice.
Tanner and Abram and I had it at number 2.
Mm.
Tanner had it at number 3 and Tucker had it at number 9.
Mm.
There's the vote distribution. So,
I would like to say that that's a easy concession vote for me.
Yeah.
I initially had it at number 13.
at 13.
And on my personal list, it's much lower.
Well, there you go. That's just how the cookie crumbles with
Mm.
with the rule of averages, I
Yep.
guess. Any thoughts, Abram? Have any thoughts about it going at place number 4?
Which is, by the way, replacing Godfather Part 2, pushing it down one spot.
Pushing Godfather Part down, so it goes in between Gentleman's Agreement
And Godfather Part 2.
and Godfather Part 2.
Yep.
Mm.
Here's what I want to say to wrap this up from my perspective. This film is an achievement in a way that I'm not sure many other films on this list are. There is a sense of scope, both from a production standpoint and what's on the screen, that is basically unmatched, I feel, which is why I put it at number 2. I think that the raw storytelling of Godfather is better. But I think that if we're looking at achievement and resonance and importance in history, this film is incredible.
Mhm.
It's simply stunning. It's one of the few times that I didn't leave a Quest of viewing annoyed that I just spent 2 hours watching some movie from 1945, This
And this
really,
time you had to watch like 9 hours of movie from 2003.
Exactly. That's
Yes.
even more impressive.
it's a testament to the filmmaking, it's a testament to J.R.R. Tolkien, and I just loved it. Period.
There you go, Abram. You said all the words that I was gonna say.
Yeah. I mean, it's just I don't think you can overstate how much of an achievement in overall filmmaking this entire trilogy is, and it obviously culminates in Return of the King. Many people have said that Return of the King is an Oscar for the entire series, and
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly believe that because I feel like we didn't spend enough time on everything in this, and I think now would be a good time to shout out that we will be doing an overall trilogy discussion.
Mhm,
It'll be
that's
going
true.
up the day after this video.
Yep.
So if you would like to hear us ramble on and just really gratify
And
Lord
just
of the
really
Rings some
geek
more.
out about it.
Yeah, geek out about Lord of the Rings. Make sure to watch that video. It'll be going up the day after this. So, but other than that, yeah, those are my thoughts on Return of the King.
I'm gonna have to say this is the only Best Picture winner that's a comfort movie for me. Lord of the Rings is a comfort film franchise. I watch it. I watch it when I'm sick. I watch it when I need a little pick me up. And, you know, to just, how do you make a film that does that? I really don't know. I don't know how to make a comfort movie,
Yeah.
but Peter Jackson did for this, and he really succeeded.
Mhm.
So with that, I think it's time to spin some wheels. I really
Okay.
wish we had a
Multiple.
physical wheel to spin here.
Oh my god, we should have planned that.
That would have been
What are
incredible.
we gonna do? Purchase a wheel on eBay? Give me that
Yeah.
laptop. I'm gonna do the Vanna White here.
All right. It's time
Oh,
to
you know
spin.
what? That means though.
What?
We won't be able to hear his song.
I'll sing the song.
No.
Oh
worry.
no, Abram's gonna
Yes,
do the song.
Abram.
Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm
Now-
here for you.
I can't wait. Let me
We
put
are
my
currently
headphones back.
spinning 1 out of 62 movies to find what is next.
What is next? And I've got our corresponding list pulled up here on my phone, and we're going to find out what it is. Okay. All right, Vanna.
Let me get the cursor right over there.
He's got to get it all set up, and we're getting ready.
3, 2, 1.
Wheel, wheel, what's your deal? Give us a film that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it on real? Wheel, wheel, what's your deal?
Wow.
As the audience, Timo, go ahead. They probably can't
Complete
hear me.
complete with sound effects and everything. You saw it as well as we did. It was the number 46. So let's look down on our list. We're heading past, then we're heading into the 1950s. Number 46 is from 1951, directed by Vincente
Vincente
Minnelli.
Minnelli.
It's an American in Paris.
Oh.
You guys know a lot about this movie?
A
Have you
nice
seen
little
it?
musical,
It's a
as far
musical,
as
yeah.
I know.
Can you
musical.
give me the top cast members, please?
The top cast members. Well, it's Gene Kelly, Leslie Caron, Oscar Levant, Georges Guittari. I'm going to
Well,
be a little French.
It's a Gene Kelly movie.
It's a Gene Kelly movie. What can
He's a
we say?
musical man, as some might say.
Incredible. We got 2 genre films right back
Mhm.
to back. I mean, we didn't really talk about it. Fantasy, I think the only other fantasy film to win Best Picture is Shape of Water. And that's different in terms of
Yeah, that's a very different type of fantasy.
That's a different that's Guillermo del Toro fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was amazing. I really love talking about this movie, and I can't wait to talk about this movie and the other 2 some more. Give you guys a little lore tidbits, give you guys little bits about the production that I'm sure you've actually already heard, but I'll just remind you.
Are you going to tell us that Viggo Mortensen actually broke his foot?
Yeah, I was going to
in
tell you
the-
that. That was the
Really?
bit, you know.
No way.
We'll be back next week to talk about American in Paris. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like and subscribe and let us know your thoughts. Do you think this movie deserved to be number 1? Do you think it deserved to be number 31? Who knows? And if you're watching on Spotify, make sure to follow and download. Do all that good stuff to help us out. And if you're really curious and you really have some things to say, join the Discord. I'm going to plug it right there. We like to have some talk about movies occasionally there.
Mhm.
That's all from me. Thank you, fellas, for joining me, making the trek down to Texas to hang out in person and record some vids. And Abram, as always, for coming in online. That was great, fellas. We'll be back next week. See ya.
What am I saying? So long.
What?
You're supposed.
He usually
you
does
always
that.
go. I always go peace, and then you wait like an enormous amount of time, and then go so long.
Oh, well, unfortunately,
Okay.
you'll have to cut that out.
We
I'm
will.
sweating through my shirt. I don't know if you can
You
tell.
think you're sweating? Oh my God, it's hot in here.
If I would rather like burp and vomit into the microphone.
That'd be hilarious, dude.
Dude.
Oh boy,
Yeah.
if Lord of the Rings doesn't have homoerotic energy between most of its characters, what does it have?
Well, it's got a lot of other stuff, but it has that too.
Yeah, the spin itself does not matter. It's the movie that we pick next. That's the real deal.
It's the song that really matters. Let's
It's
not
the
be
song.
humble.
Yeah,
Let's not be
I
humble.
didn't.
here,
I
Tony.
didn't want to say it, but I felt it in my heart. The cold, dark cackles of my heart.